The weapon may be formed, but it won't prosper. When the darkness falls, it won't prevail. 'Cause the God I serve knows only how to triumph, yes. And my God will never fail. Sing it with us. Oh, and my God, he'll never fail. 'Cause I'm gonna see a victory, yes. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. Oh, I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory, yes. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. There's power in the mighty name of Jesus. Every war he wages, he will win. Do y'all believe that this morning? I'm not backing down from any giant. Y'all know why? 'Cause I know how this story is. Yes, come on, victory. I know how this story ends. I'm gonna see a victory, yes. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. I'm gonna see a victory, yes. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good, yes. You turn it for good. Come on. You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. Come on, Holy Spirit. Turn it for good this morning. You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. Yes. You turn it for good. Oh, yeah. You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. Yes. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. I'm gonna see a victory. Claim it. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. I'm gonna see a victory. Yes, I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. Yes, for the battle belongs to you, Lord. Yes, we're claiming victory this morning.
Welcome back. Thank you for joining me again. Previously, our examination of primary sources from the colonial and early Republican eras have shown us that Christianity played a critical and crucial role in America's founding. We saw how the First Great Awakening significantly impacted the American Revolution and the new government that was subsequently formed. This week, we're going to examine the educational system in America from the early 1600s through the late 19th century. Now, America has been engaged in a discussion, a very heated discussion, about the role religion should play in education. There are those that say religion has absolutely no place in the American educational system. Others argue that the foundation of the nation rested on religious principles, and therefore there is a need to teach those in the public schools. So let's examine educational laws, governing documents, textbooks, and the expressed beliefs of the Founding Fathers to determine what role religion should have in educational policy. So, in all honesty, this is probably where I have the most passion, so please bear with me as we get through some of these educational laws and how education was done. Once again, we're looking at laws and governing documents to provide a source to derive the society's priorities. America created the first educational laws early in the colonial era. The first recorded educational law in the American colonies was in Puritan, Massachusetts, and it was called the Old Deluder-Satan Act. It was passed in 1642. The statute begins, "It being one chief project of the old deluder Satan to keep men from the knowledge of the Scriptures as in former times," and goes on to mandate that every township in this jurisdiction, after the Lord hath increased them to 50 households, shall forthwith appoint one within their town to teach all such children as shall resort to him to write and to read. In the Massachusetts colony, the stated purpose for teaching children to read and write was to guard against the influence of Satan, and children were to be taught to read and write. Clearly, religion and education were intertwined early on in the American education system. But Massachusetts was not the only colony that placed religion as a top priority. The Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, the first written constitution in the colonies, also took on this role. Representatives from 3 townships gathered together to develop the government and set of laws for the citizens of those townships. And the preamble states the reasons the settlers desired to form a government. While the document clearly states that the government would draw its authority from the consent of the people, it also makes numerous references to God. Connecticut established the government because the Word of God requires that to maintain the peace and union of such a people, there should be an orderly and decent government established according to God. The priority of the early citizens of Connecticut was to honor and obey God in all that they did. God ordained the government and established it according to his principles. Citizens had to be able to read the Bible to know these principles. Therefore, education was imperative, especially religious education. The idea that religion was essential to good government and therefore education had to be a top priority did not dissipate over the 150 years from colonization to the early Republic era. The founders in the Continental Congress expressed the sentiment in the Northwest Ordinance. This law was passed by the Continental Congress under the Articles of Confederation, which was the first system of government that we had in the United States, and it carried over into the constitutional era with the United States Congress governing the frontier territory. Incidentally, the Northwest Ordinance is one of the very few carryovers from the Articles of Confederation. The educational policy set in place by the national legislature in this law provides insight into the intentions of the nation's leaders regarding the importance of education and the role that religion should play in it. The ordinance contains the first national educational law of the United States, and it says, "Religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged." The law asserts that the purpose of encouraging schools is to ensure the impartation of religion, morality, and knowledge, showing a strong correlation between education and religion in the earliest days of the nation. Education in colonial America looked different than today. For example, the term public school simply referred to a school which anyone could attend. It did not mean that it was publicly financed by the government, just that anybody could attend it. The financiers decided all educational policies in these privately funded schools. The responsibility of education was primarily on the parents, and we see that that is very biblical in Deuteronomy. They decided how or if a child received an education. Often, education meant placing a child with another family to learn a trade. In many places, schools were scarce. Again, this was the colonial period. People were spread out. There weren't always the resources or the ability to get to a school. Tutors were the more common choice for educating children in the South for families that could afford the expense. Schools were more accessible in the Middle and New England colonies. They sincerely held religious teachings of prominent religions in the area, and they heavily influenced these schools. So a rich source of information regarding the priorities of early American educational policy is the curriculum or the textbooks that were used. Though regional differences existed regarding education, the textbooks used were prevalent throughout the land. The primary text of the colonial and early American classroom was the Bible. It could be found in every educational institution in the nation because it was the most owned book in the colonies. Other books could be hard to acquire for many families, but most had a Bible. Although the Bible was the most popular, it was not the only text used. The three most used texts after the Bible were the New England Primer, the Blueback Speller, and the McGuffey Readers. The New England Primer is the first text printed in America and was one of the most popular texts used in the colonial classrooms. The Primer included direct references to God, biblical teachings, and moral lessons. Students learned the alphabet through rhyme, with each letter referencing a biblical figure or event. One reading exercise entitled A Lesson for Children provides instructions on appropriate activities. The list includes pray to God, love God, fear God, serve God. American classrooms used some version of this book into the 20th century. The extensive use of this text for the extended period of time indicates that religion held a prominent role in educating the student. And if you'll look at the, in your packet, there is a list or a page from the New England Primer that has the alphabet on it. It says, in Adam's fall, we sinned all. That's how they would learn the letter A. B, C, D, each letter would have a little rhyme like that had some sort of biblical principle or lesson about it. Another widely used text was Noah Webster's The American Spelling Book. It was commonly called the Blueback Speller. Webster desired to bring consistency to the spelling and use of American English. I'm sure you've noticed as we've looked at some of these primary sources that their spellings were rather inventive at times, and Noah Webster felt that we really should formalize those spellings. And so he wanted to bring consistency to American English and wrote the Blueback Speller in an effort to do that. The standardization was desperately needed, and the introduction of the book discusses his desire to provide a text to aid in the education of children. He notes that all three regions of the land, northern, middle, and southern colonies, use the text, and he ends the introduction by saying, As the first part of the Institute met with the general appropriation of my fellow citizens, it is presumed the labor bestowed upon this work in correcting and improving the system will render it still more acceptable to the public by facilitating the education of youth and enabling teachers to instill in their minds, with the first rudiments of the language, some just ideas of religion, morals, and domestic economy. The text included the proper spelling of words, pronunciation exercises, language rules, and reading exercises. Many of the pronunciation and reading exercises taught moral lessons or referred to God. In other words, what we today would call a language arts book was used as a way to teach biblical truths as well as proper spelling and language rules. The McGuffey Readers are some of the most popular texts used in the fledgling nation's classrooms. They're actually still in print today and can still be utilized today. An examination of the earliest books reveals a strong inclination to religious teachings. However, by 1879, the readers had a more subtle spiritual message. The reading exercises still taught moral lessons and desirable qualities for children to learn and develop, but without the obvious biblical or Christian references. Still, developing good moral character based on traditional Christian teachings was a priority for education. Only the methodology had changed. Incidentally, each one of these books is rather small, and I do have reproduction copies that I will have at church on Sunday if anybody would like to see them. But some of them are literally only about this big, so that they could fit into the saddlebags of the horses that were being ridden to school. So far, we've seen that education in the colonial and American early republic eras was heavily religious. But what about academics? Were students receiving a rigorous academic education as well? You know, sometimes we go too far and only teach religious, or we go too far and only teach academic. What was going on in the colonial schools? Well, let's look at some examples from a typical elementary level education. I like to call this, are you smarter than a colonial student? Let's start with everyone's favorite, math. Here are two word problems found in the commonly used math text of the time, Ray's Arithmetic. Incidentally, you can still get Ray's Arithmetic online. All right, first problem. See if you can solve this one. A contractor bought 80 horses for the government at $125 apiece. The freight was $200, and the agent's commission was such that the horses cost the government $10,450. What percent was the commission? Remember, these are elementary school questions. Let's try this one. Bought 50 gross of rubber buttons for $25, $10, and 5% off. Disposed of the lot for $35.91 at a profit of 12%. What was the list price of the buttons per gross? Got the answers yet? All right, well, let's look at some mental math problems of the time. Not only were the students expected to be able to take pencil and paper or a slate and piece of chalk and work out these word problems that we've just looked at, but they were expected to do mental math. So consider this mental math problem. They had to completely work this problem in their head. No paper, no chalkboard or anything to work it out on. A boat worth $864, of which 1/8 belonged to A, 1/4 belonged to B, and the rest to C was lost. What loss did each sustain in having been insured for $500? Or maybe this one. If 7 men can do a piece of work in 4 days, In what time can it be done if 3 of the men leave when the work is half completed? Does anybody's mind hurt now? Okay, so maybe math isn't your subject. It certainly was not mine in school, but maybe math is not your subject. So let's look at social studies. Let's look at my area of expertise. Here are some elementary geography and U.S. history test questions from the 1800s. Again, this is elementary level. 1862 Chicago Public Schools geography test questions. How many degrees of longitude are there? How many degrees wide are the temperate zones? What is a watershed? Name the principal animals of the frigid zones. Again, elementary school. All right, so how about these history questions? Can you answer these history questions from the 1822 elementary history test? What is a writ of habeas corpus? What is a bill of attainder? What is an ex post facto law? Enumerate the powers denied to the several states. What are bills of credit? So, how did you do? I don't know about you, but in elementary school, I would not have been able to pass with these questions. The textbooks of the early Republic era reveal that religion was still an essential part of the student's education, but it was still a rigorous education. Emma Willard, a pioneer in education for women, authored several textbooks for American classrooms. And in those texts, she included lessons in religion and morality to achieve academic objectives. So what was happening was academically, the students were being taught rigorously, but the avenue through which they were being taught was religious. Her famous history text, Willard's famous history text called A System of Universal History in Perspective, was riddled with biblical events. She began history with biblical creation. She included Noah's flood in her history book, the Tower of Babel, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Students studied these events as facts, and American classrooms in the 19th century widely used the book. So education was rigorous and religious. Religion also played a prominent role in higher education in early America. Let's look at the development of that. David Barton is the founder of a conservative organization called Wall Builders. And in his book, 4 Centuries of American Education, he explores education in America for the first 400 years of the nation's history. Barton argues that the educational system of early America was much more rigorous than today. And I would say after looking at some of the things elementary students were expected to know that we would have to agree. Barton asserts that the reason for the decline in the education system is the removal of religion from the curriculum. When making his case, Barton examines the origins of several of the first colleges and universities in America. Yale, Harvard, and Princeton were all established as schools to train ministers, and even after diversifying their course of study, maintain stringent requirements regarding religious practices. Let's take a look at these 3 prestigious schools and see what these requirements were, as well as who some of their graduates were. So let's look at Yale. Notable graduates from Yale. You have Declaration of Independence signers Lyman Hall, Philip Livingston, Lewis Morris, Oliver Wilcott. Constitution signers Abraham Baldwin, Jared Ingersoll, William Livingston. Noah Webster also graduated from Yale. What were some of these requirements? Well, the students were required to live religious and blameless life and read the scriptures daily. And they were admonished Above all, have an eye to the great end of all your studies, which is to obtain the clearest conceptions of divine things and to lead you to a saving knowledge of God in his Son, Jesus Christ. They were admonished that the whole purpose of their education was to come to a saving knowledge of Christ and to understand divine things. This is Yale. Let's look at Harvard. Harvard boasted John Adams, John Hancock, Samuel Adams, William Ellery, and Elbridge Gerry, who signed the Declaration of Independence, William Samuel Johnson and Rufus King, who signed the Constitution. The school motto was "For Christ and the Church," as well as "For the glory of Christ." And the students were admonished, "Let every student be plainly instructed, and consider well that the main end of his life and studies is to know God and Jesus, which is eternal life, and therefore to lay Christ in the bottom as the only foundation of all sound knowledge and learning." This is Harvard University. And if I am not mistaken, it came out in the news recently that Harvard has the first atheist chaplain now. But that is not where Harvard started. Harvard started so that students would come to a saving knowledge of Christ and then go on and minister to others. How about Princeton? Princeton boasted Richard Stockton, Benjamin Rush, John Witherspoon. They were Declaration signers. Gunning Bedford, James Madison, Jonathan Dayton, and William Patterson, constitutional signers. James Madison wrote the Constitution. Requirements of these students: college president John Witherspoon required students to attend chapel twice a day and to attend public worship on Sunday. Students were admonished, "He is the best friend to American liberty who is most sincere and active in promoting true and undefiled religion, and who sets himself with the greatest firmness to bear down on profanity and immorality of every kind. Whoever is an avowed enemy of God, I hesitate not to call him an enemy to his country." Witherspoon didn't mince words. Clearly, religion and education were equal partners, even in higher education. Several founders indicated the importance that they placed on the role of education in society. We've seen now that we have educational laws from early on in the colonial period. We've seen that the textbooks included religious teachings as well as rigorous academic teachings. We've seen that the higher institutions, the colleges of the era, or the universities of the nation, began as religious educational institutions. What about the founding fathers? What about the men who founded this country? What did they have to say about education? Well, Dr. Benjamin Rush had a lot to say on the issue. He advocated for the education of women and Africans. Keep in mind, this is the 1770s that he is advocating for this. He commented on the relationship between education and religion several times. His letter entitled "A Defense of the Use of the Bible in Schools" gives approximately a dozen reasons why the Bible should be the primary textbook of American schools. He said, "In contemplating the political institutions of the United States, I lament that if we remove the Bible from schools, we waste so much time and money punishing crimes that take so little pains to prevent them. For this divine book, above all others, favors that equality among mankind, that respect for just laws, these sober and frugal virtues which constitute the soul of our government." In other words, Benjamin Rush said if we just teach the Bible in school, we wouldn't have to spend all this time, money, and effort on prosecuting people for crimes. We just wouldn't have the criminal issues. Rush's biography by Robert Wan and John Sanderson details the influence religion had in Rush's upbringing and throughout his life. And it's noted by several of his contemporaries that Dr. Rush lived out his religious beliefs and applied them to every area of his life. In other words, he walked the walk. He didn't just talk the talk. Dr. Benjamin Rush and Fisher Ames were both signers of the Declaration of Independence. Fisher Ames also had much to say on the subject. He was one of the primary authors of the First Amendment and warned that the Bible should never be removed from the classroom or have a position of diminished prominence. He said, "It has been the custom of late years to put a number of little books into the hands of children containing fables and moral lessons. This is very well because it is right first to raise curiosity and then to guide it. Many books for children are, however, injudiciously compiled. Why then, if these books for children must be retained, as they will be, should not the Bible regain the place it once held as a school book? Its morals are pure, its examples captivating and noble. The reverence for the sacred book that is thus early impressed lasts long, and probably, if not impressed in infancy, never takes firm hold in the mind." Fisher Ames penned the First Amendment, you know, the one that is used to keep religion out of things. But he said that religion should be in the educational system and that the Bible should be the primary text. And listen again, if not impressed in infancy, never takes firm hold in the mind. There are studies that show us that children have the most development and are the most impressionable from the ages of 0 to 5 years old. If we don't get them then, a lot of times we don't get them. Noah Webster, a Revolutionary soldier, legislator, judge, and college founder, textbook author, and helper with the wording of the Constitution, said this: "The Christian religion is the most important, and one of the first things in which all children under a free government ought to be instructed. No truth is more evident to my mind than that the Christian religion must be the basis of any government intended to secure the rights and privileges of free people." Again, a founding father is saying Christianity, teaching children Christianity and living it out is the only way to ensure a free nation. Gouverneur Morris, a penman and signer of the Constitution, said this: "For avoiding the extremes of despotism or anarchy, the only ground of hope must be on the morals of the people. I believe that religion is the only solid base of morals, and that morals are the only possible support of free governments. Therefore, education should teach the precepts of religion and the duties of man towards God." He also said, "Religion is the only solid basis of good morals." Here are a few more quotes for consideration. And if you picked up the packet the first week with the documents in it, you should have these quotes as well. "To a man of liberal education, with regard to the history contained in the Bible, it is not so much praiseworthy to be acquainted with it as it is shameful to be ignorant of it." That was said by John Quincy Adams. He happened to be a U.S. president and a Harvard professor. "The Bible is a necessary part of a polite education," according to Henry Laurens, founding father and president of Congress. In a letter to James Warren, Samuel Adams wrote, "If virtue and knowledge are diffused among the people, they will never be enslaved. This will be their great security." He also said, Let ministers and philosophers, statesmen and patriots unite their endeavors to renovate the age by impressing the minds of men with the importance of educating their little boys and girls, of inculcating in the minds of youth the love of their country, of instructing them in the art of self-government, and in short, of leading them in the study and practice of the exalted virtues of the Christian system. Charles Finney, who became president of Oberlin College, and he was a leader of the Second Great Awakening, said, "A good education is a great good, but if not sanctified, it is odious to God. The very acquisitions of education that will give you higher esteem among men will, if unsanctified, make your character more utterly odious before God." These are some pretty strong words from founding and leading men. But not all of our founders were Christian. While most of the prominent leaders during the founding of the nation held Christian beliefs, not all were religious. So what did the least religious leaders have to say about education? Let's look at Benjamin Franklin first. Remember, he's the one that said that Whitefield almost persuaded him. Almost. He said, "History will afford frequent opportunities of showing the necessity of a public religion from its usefulness to the public and the advantage of a religious character among private persons, and the excellency of the Christian religion above all others, ancient or modern." So even though Franklin himself was not a religious man, he said it was necessary for there to be a religion among the people, and that the Christian religion was above all else, all others. Thomas Paine, who wrote Common Sense and was by all accounts a very non-religious man, said, "It has been the error of the schools to teach sciences and subjects of natural philosophy as accomplishments only, whereas they should be taught with reference to the being who is the author of them. For the principles of science are of a divine origin." Thomas Paine, completely non-religious, said we are wrong to be teaching subjects like science without teaching about the creator of science. So obviously, they still believed that religion was necessary and beneficial in education. Benjamin Franklin also said, "A Bible and a newspaper in every house, a good school in every district, all studied and appreciated as they merit, are the principal support of virtue, morality, and civil liberty." Clearly, the founders could not conceive of a proper education being devoid of religion. Even when controversy arose regarding religious teachings in school in the 19th century, the issue was not whether or not religion would be taught. Instead, the issue centered on the Christian doctrine that would be taught. Bishop John Hughes was a Catholic bishop who spoke out against the taxation of citizens in New York to pay for a public school system that taught Protestantism. While still a minority, New York had a large Catholic population, and these families didn't want to send their children to public schools because they were taught the tenets of the Protestant faith, not the Catholic faith. Bishop Hughes argued that they should not have to pay for schools where their children did not attend. Instead, he asked that the government money be used or be given to the Catholics to run their own schools to teach their own doctrine. While this is the first widely known case in America regarding teaching religion in school, it is interesting that the question was not the teaching of religion, but whether states should support schools that only taught a specific religion. It seemed a given to all parties that schools would teach religion. Additionally, a review of the first educational laws, governing documents, textbooks used, and expressed beliefs of the Founding Fathers has revealed the priorities of early American educational policies. We've seen that the commonly held view of the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries was that good government required a good and moral citizenry. Religious instruction achieved this goal. Therefore, religion was an essential part of early American educational policy. But what about more recently? Well, in 1952, there was a Supreme Court case called Zorach versus Clausen. And this is what the court said. When the state encourages religious instruction or cooperates with religious authorities by adjusting the schedule of public events to sectarian needs, it follows the best of our traditions. For it then respects the religious nature of our people and accommodates the public service of their spiritual needs. To hold that it may not would be to find in the Constitution a requirement that the government show a callous indifference to religious groups. That would be preferring those who believe in no religion over those who do believe. We find not such constitutional requirement. So even as recently as 1952, it was commonly accepted that religion would be a part of education, and the Supreme Court declared that it was constitutional. So what's been the result of the removal of religion from our educational system? Let's compare the educational system that dominated for the first 300 years of the nation and the one that's become prevalent in the last 60 years. Let's look at some present-day educational facts. Now, these statistics are from 2005. Honestly, it actually scares me to try and get statistics from more recently. But America ranked in 2005 65 out of 200 countries in literacy. Several third world nations are ranked higher than the United States of America in literacy. And among high school graduates, 700,000 in 2005 could not even read their own diplomas. I could share more statistics, but they're too depressing, just to be honest. In previous centuries, however, the average age to enter college was 13 or 14 years old. If you refer back to the examples of the early test questions, you can see how academically rigorous the education was. And they utilized the proven elements of sound education: religion, morality, and knowledge. They were interwoven. You cannot educate a child halfway. When you only educate them in the academic side and not on the spiritual side, you will not educate them properly. So, why does any of this matter? Why does it matter if education includes religion, besides the statistics we just looked at? Well, the axiom, the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next, is accredited to Abraham Lincoln. He did say this. So why do I need to know all this information? What does this mean to me? Well, Proverbs 1:7 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge." It is our responsibility as citizens. David Barton says, it is our responsibility as citizens not only to protect the proven educational philosophy that has made and kept America great, but also to do everything we can to transmit that successful educational philosophy to future generations, just as our forebears did throughout the first 4 centuries of American education. Again, the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation is the philosophy of government in the next. If you don't like what's going on in the government in the United States of America now, look back to what was taught in the classroom when those leaders were being educated. And what is being taught in our classrooms now? Because that's going to determine where America is going to go in the future. The Founding Fathers had it right when they said religion was necessary to good government. What our children learn as students will determine their beliefs, spiritual and political, as adults. They cannot spend 40 hours a week in a classroom being taught that there is no God, being taught that we came from a big bang and that evolution is how everything came about, and spend